provide.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Cleveland Community Police Commission Investigations, Discipline, and Accountability Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us on this Monday, August 7th. And we will now do a roll call. So, Dr. Adams?
Present.
Commissioner Benito?
Present.
Commissioner Chura?
Present.
Commissioner Zayed?
Present.
Okay, great. We have a quorum and full house. And welcome to our people joining us online and in our audience today. There will be, I apologize that the agenda actually should say 4. Originally, this meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, but it just take 2 hours off of that, off of those times, and we should be fine. I will allow some brief public comment after each agenda item. Just please limit your comment to 1 minute, and at the end, there'll be a longer public comment period. Okay, so we will begin with just some updates and old business on our work groups. This could be, I imagine, pretty short. If you want to just, for the first one is the gender-based violence work group. If Commissioner Zayed and Commissioner Benito want to give just a brief update, if there's anything new. If not, we can move on to the next work groups.
I don't think there's, we're still sticking with the same plan to take this kind of period to request documents and do some research on the 3 topics, which were sexual harassment by officers to community members, officer-involved domestic violence cases, and treatment of juvenile Black females.
Okay. So, I think at this point, since we are starting a lot of other work, we could just potentially, I think the right word is maybe defer this work group until we gather more information. And all right, so until 3 of you tell me that there's something new with the work group, we'll just take it off of our agenda until further notice.
Yeah, I think what we said was 6 months, so I would say put it back on, we'll get the committee together.
But if there's something, exigent or something that comes up, just let me know. Okay, thank you. The next we have is the Brady Giglio list work group. So that is Commissioner Chura and I are on the work group. I am still in the process of gathering the legal expertise that we need for that work group. So that's basically the only update I have. Go ahead.
Oh, I also wanted to add that we did send the draft framework for the work group for the proposal to use for the work committee work group framework. So
okay, so I will add that. I will look that over and add that in. Thank you. And Commissioner Chura, any thoughts about the Brady Giglio list? We really just need, the proper legal kind of counsel to proceed. So hopefully, and at that point when we make the process, I hope that commissioners and other people will participate in going through those files and materials. Do you have any thoughts?
Just like we discussed before, just going over some of the departmental notices with discipline and maybe a search to the same begins for anything like untruthfulness, deceit, things of that nature. And I had a quick question with the gender base. Have we done any research into cases or anything yet, or are you still looking, just starting?
For which?
For all of them. I mean, any kind of, it'd probably be pretty easy to get a DV stuff because that's investigated by IA. But any kind of research into it yet, or?
In terms of all 3 of the topics, I mean, I think we all, I certainly have done research, but kind of how it is I'll be doing the officer-involved domestic violence project. Commissioner Zayed will be kind of taking the lead on the sexual harassment, and then Commissioner Garrett Ferguson will be taking the lead on the juvenile Black females. treatment of juvenile Black females. So I have done research on officer-involved domestic violence cases and best practices and trends. And then the next step on that project will be requesting case files to then start going through.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But I'd love to have a conversation with you about it.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then the discipline work group, we are just trying to, move ahead with that. So to answer your question, I don't know if I have to forward that message to you, but I have requested, the batch of cases from OPS for, the departures from the safety director and the chief. Unfortunately, I'm facing some headwinds that I'm not really fully understanding and delays in getting that information. Hopefully, I requested the first batch for, probably mid of this week. It should arrive. If not, then I have to follow up. So just let me know. I think if we can maybe start a list of the things that you may need to request. I would just request them earlier than later, it seems like. I think the general working standard is we're giving them 7 days, but there seems to be confusion with the co-chairs as to how the process of requesting those documents are. To my understanding, any commissioner can request this as long as Jason and the co-chairs are CC'd on it. So I think that's pretty practical right there. But just to make sure that Jason already doesn't have the information, that another work group or another committee has not already worked on it. So so far we have Commissioner Chura on that work group. I didn't know if there was interest by another commissioner to be on that work group with Commissioner Chura. This is a discipline work group looking deeply at discipline. How would you, if you, Commissioner Chura, could you tell us how you would envision the work as from your experiences as the commander of IA?
I would just review I would review each case and ensure everything was a well documented investigation, and that all the steps are covered. With IA investigations, I think they got a good template they're following now, where they list everything, almost like a table of contents and everything else. In the old days, it wasn't quite that thorough. I think sometimes it tells you exactly where the information is that you're looking for.
I would be interested, but I know that Dr. Adams isn't on any of our work groups so far, so I'll defer to him if he wants to be on the work group.
I don't understand what the point. I mean, I get discipline, but I don't really understand what the work group is doing.
Well, there is.
It's like my first time hearing about it.
It's not the first time we've talked about it.
It's my first time hearing about it.
Well, that may not be. I'm just saying that this is not the first time we've spoken about it. If you want to read some more of the documents that I've provided, I think it'll become clearer as to what the discipline work group is. It's not just for investigations. There seems to be systemic issues of discipline, unequal discipline, and also it could border on training because there's GPOs that might be hard for people to understand. So it's a broader look at discipline, but also smaller than what accountability is, because accountability is broader than discipline.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to add that my understanding, I don't think it's been like the most clear. I think because we're still working on defining it, but my understanding is looking at the system of discipline as opposed to looking at like specific cases or specific policies, but like what is the whole system of how is discipline, I think from kind of the ground up, from how cases are being reviewed, what what's being followed, how it's being meted out, and then how, like, what kind of training is being followed up on, that kind of thing. So I think it's like the structural pieces, not individual cases, and not even necessarily the.
I think the accountability. So training used to be under accountability in the previous commission. So it's all as if you read that report, I think you get even though they had, obviously limitations because they weren't able to get a lot of the case files. It's anything that could make the disciplinary process, that could taint it, that could make it unequal, that things that we can fix. So it's a much more systemic review of that. Like, for example, you saw in the accountability report something about secondary employment, right? And sick leave. That's why the aspects of the union contract are very important, because it's more like I would say a labor kind of assessment, and of the discipline system, and really a labor, like through the perspective of labor, how those resources are being properly aligned in the CDB, especially when they're a little understaffed. So some of the things that we saw in the union contract, which we'll go through, are going to become more and more contentious between the union and the department. So, but if you do cover if you uncover specific cases that we need to look at, you're actually looking at patterns. Obviously we can, but it is Commissioner Benito is right. It's a systemic review of patterns, things like that structurally we can change in order to improve the performance and the retention, and the efficacy of the CDP. Any other comments, Mr. Chura?
No, not at this time, but we never know what pattern we might discover. Like you were saying, it ties in with training. If there's a pattern, officers are being disciplined for whatever the issue might be, then maybe they have to be retrained. There might be more additional training, which we would request the division to do on that issue.
But it is looking at, I guess, individual discipline cases, and then backtracking and seeing, is there a pattern? Is there something? Is it just this one officer did this, or is there something in the system that is causing this unequal, not disproportionate discipline, right? If we see one GPO that's constantly being violated, is it improper training? Is it people don't understand it? What are the possibilities? So it's identifying those things so we can fix those things. Does that make sense? So, so are you interested into that work group, or you're going to pass? Okay. So Commissioner Benito then? Okay.
Sure.
And obviously we all will be working on this, but just you guys would be the canaries, searching out what the problems are.
Yeah.
So, and I think Mr. Chura has obviously a lot of experience in that regard. All right. So thank you so much. And if you can, I think Jason and I can work out some of the major kind of goals of that work group. If you would like to give us some input and speak among yourself, and that would be great. Okay. But we're going to be giving a draft of our 18-month plan. I need to get the draft by Monday. So if you just want to jot down some thoughts, Jason and I are already working on it. So if you think, what do you think are on the top of your head? What are the broad things that we may need to look at?
I would think for a morale standpoint, uneven discipline or no discipline for certain individuals.
What have been possible structural causes for that you've seen? That's quick.
Some people I think they just make, I think they have a sense of entitlement because of their rank or position.
Okay.
That the rules don't apply to them when they should.
Okay. So there is, again, this leadership divide. Is there, maybe just my ignorance, why is it historically there are two unions why would you bifurcate the two?
At one time, they were all under the FOP. And I guess the patrol officers weren't happy the way the contracts were going. They felt like they were getting the short end of the stick, where the bosses were getting more benefits or raising pay. So they broke off.
Interesting.
They broke off, and now we have two unions. So one is just CPPA is for the detectives and the patrol officers. And then the FOP is all the supervisors, up to including commanders, certain commanders. It doesn't include the traffic commission.
Okay. One thing I think that might be a struggle when you're looking at this is to think about the type of data that will help you uncover this. I do think maybe one thing that could be requested is the salaries, or the actual, because I think there's overtime pay. If you look at that, you may see some other driving economic force that's kind of defining the system. but just like think about the data that you would need, and are we going to find it?
A lot of this is, from past leadership
Mhm.
at the top of the division. So I think some of it's changed now. It might not be as prevalent as it once was,
Mhm.
which is a very good thing.
And obviously you've seen that, and we can intuitively understand that unequal discipline can lead to a decline in morale and
Correct. If you're telling you're disciplining me and you're not disciplining a supervisor for doing the same thing or worse,
Right.
you definitely have morale problems.
And let's think about the other ways that discipline can be used, not just to dock pay, but to prevent promotions and things like that. So everything is kind of intertwined,
Correct.
right? So those are the things that we would be looking at. Like I'm going to try to get a friend who's an economist and labor economist to help. The numbers may show a lot of things, right? Okay, so but I would say a lot of things that are in that union contract that are under negotiation and in the accountability report would be a great starting point. So if you just give me your thoughts, just briefly, as to what types of things you want to fix. And once you fix one hole, maybe it gives you a lot more information about the other landscape. But Jim, I think when did you retire?
In 2020.
So you have a lot of experience then. Do you think things have changed significantly? You were there for the consent decree.
I think things have changed a lot in a lot of different ways. I mean, just the retention of personnel is really, I think it's going to become a major problem pretty soon. There was a departmental notice out with departures from the division, and I think maybe 5 or 6 people received their pension. And there were like probably 20 plus people that resigned from the division, and I've never seen anything like that before in my 33 years on the division. So I think there's going to be a serious issue with the personnel, just even a safety issue, because they're being held over, almost mandated constantly. When they come back from their days off, they're mandated to stay if there's a gap with covering a shift. So I think it's getting really, it's really tough, I think, for people, especially if you have a young family. It's okay for a single guy. When I was single, I didn't have to really answer to anybody, but you got wife and children, you got to take care of your family too. So I think there's going to be some issues there definitely in the near future.
Is there a way, Jim, that we can get the thoughts of the rank and file on this, or?
To the chair, just a point, they were doing exit interviews, so you can get exit interviews. Previously, they had established that, so they're supposed to, or they were at the time period, sending surveys on SurveyMonkey to officers after they separated and asking them to do an exit interview explaining why they are separating from the division. So if they're still doing that, it may be data that can help in that regard. We have heard from several sources. I know the point that a lot of the story crafters like to make is that because the commission exists, that's why officers are leaving. I wholeheartedly dispute that. That is a divisive way of saying it, but I have heard since my time here in 2017 and beyond, officers say discipline is a reason why they either don't enjoy coming to work or why they leave, right? So we can't leave discipline out of the conversation as a factor. And in 2019, when Sergeant Richard Jackson had a discipline work group, which maybe Commissioner Chura would like to look at, we can sit down and go through what that work group already accomplished, some of the recommendations we made to reduce the stress on the discipline system that have not been followed through with to this day. So our recommendations were in 2019. They've never given us a formal reply to those, but they included things like streamlining your group ones. So a lot of them are turnkey, right? And they're still doing case prep, aggravating, mitigating circumstances for very simple things. So you can just have a turnkey process for your group ones that are routine, right? So like, your first body cam offense, right? You don't have to go through a whole case prep with that if you already have a system and say everybody gets the same thing for the first time, right? Whether it be a letter or whatever. And then your other simple group 1 offenses, because they're doing a lot of time, energy, and effort on low priority Group 1 offenses. So that was one of the recommendations we made amongst other. We also put out a great suggestion for OPS to start a mediation program so that as an alternative, other cities do it. Most consent decree cities have mediation programs. Cleveland chose not to for a specific reason. And it was fought tooth and nail by the previous administration to implement our recommendation. But the idea was, again, that it does, for the citizen complaint side, you can't build trust without conversations, right? And a lot of these things, it's a zero-sum game when a person files a complaint. Either the officer is going to be aggrieved by the process or the citizen is. But somebody leaves that table upset, right, at the end of the day. And it doesn't work for a lot of these things. Sometimes people just want an opportunity to have a conversation with that officer in a safe space, and it won't result in a complaint. They just want to be heard. They want to be understood. They want acknowledgement of what happened to them. And maybe they don't want to see discipline, right? So we're only giving the option of pursuing discipline for citizens when we should be giving them the option to sit down, build a relationship with their officers, get them to understand why they feel the way they do, right? And if they choose discipline as an option, they still can do the complaint at any time. But most cities have been running effective mediation programs. Places that had consent decrees like Denver and New Orleans have very great mediation programs. It eases stress and it builds a place where they can have conversations with each other to understand the differences between officers in the community and how they got in the situation they did. And it's just, it was a really good proposal. So things like that would fall into this, that we can carry that torch forward. And then you heard from Black Shield and Hispanic Officers Association come forward and say they feel that, you know, there is, to Jim's point, you know, there is disparity in, I've heard that from every union, every at the patrol level, and sometimes at the lower supervisory level, there's a disparity between quote unquote the white shirts, the C-suite, and the officers, right? But then you heard Black Shield and Hispanic officers say there's another level to that too. You know, try being in our organization, you know, which is different, even more different with discipline. So we can look at, you know, bringing them back into this group. They were members of our previous iteration to work with Jim Chura and you, Commissioner, and get this thing moving so that you can define what you want to do, what areas you want to look in, and see how discipline really impacts this department. We all understand why it's been the consent decree mandated more discipline, right? But and it uses the words like fairness and consistency. But when you look at the research on police discipline, you have to define what fairness and consistency means, and that's another recommendation that we made that's never come to fruition. Is you can't follow something you don't define, right? So the recommendation, there was a great Harvard paper done about it, saying, you know, it's defined differently in every department, but their advice was define it and then hold yourself accountable to what fairness and consistency means in your department, because you hear that word thrown around a lot. But then when people point fingers and say, well, this wasn't fair, you have no standard of fairness and you have no standard of consistency. And the matrix right now that there is in use still has a lot of criticism on the fairness and consistency side, because there's so much discretion with the safety director the chief can use, which takes out some of that. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully this will help guide that specific discipline work, and a lot's already been done in this area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, if I can, if you can identify, maybe heuristically you experience these problems, but also if we can think about the other forces and the data that we need. I think the data is there, that we can see these patterns and also prove them a little bit. I think sometimes when this is a very emotional kind of topic, so the data can help people really see what is happening a little bit more. So if we think about those things, and I do have like a copy of if we can give them the copy of that mediation plan and any previous documents, Jason, that like all of us. All right, okay. So Lou, do you have 1 minute of comment?
Actually, I have a few questions, simple questions. First of all, I would like to know, because lots of lots of members in the community, especially lots of female members in the community, they all want to know if community members can join the work group
Yeah,
for,
yeah.
for this particular committee. Different committee handle different things, but this committee is handling lots of things, actually happen between officers and community members. So lots of people want to know if they can join the work group. That's number one. Number two is, when you guys mentioned the domestic violence, Commissioner Chura actually was talking about internal affairs. So that means the DV you are talking about is probably the sexual harassment stuff already established in the department, not really the parts community members are way more concerned that they can be sexually harassed by somebody in the law reinforcement.
Oh.
So in this case, we don't even know if there's any data ever been collected. Please, to look at it.
Well, with the DV, domestic violence, the internal affairs would have that information involving officers. Now, for sexual harassment, that's kind of a little different story. However, there have been cases where officers committed crimes, sexual battery, rape, whatever it might be, maybe with a prostitute, something of that nature, and they've actually gone to prison. But like a low level, I don't know, I guess if you were like trying to pick up a waitress in a restaurant or something like that, it probably might not even be reported, but it might just be like flirting. But if they made a complaint, it would be investigated for sure.
But why is that from internal affairs?
If it's a crime, it's investigated by internal affairs. And that would be, like I said, like a sexual battery, a sexual imposition, something of that nature. But domestic violence also would be a crime they would investigate.
Commissioner Benito?
I think what Commissioner Chura is saying, so that if there's a police are called and there's a complaint filed and then there's like an investigation, that's going to be handled by internal affairs. If there's a complaint that's not, the police are being called and a crime is being reported, then that's going to be handled by OPS, the Office of Professional Standards. So I think that's what.
That's correct.
Well, isn't it actually that all criminal, OPS can, if it's of a criminal nature, it would be returned to IA.
Correct. If there's a complaint filed,
So all criminal
and
complaints.
it's found, if they suspect there's criminal activity involved by an officer at OPS, they'll send the complaint over to internal affairs and they'll look at it. Maybe consult with the prosecutor and determine if it is a crime. If it's a crime, they'll keep the investigation. If it's determined it's not a crime at that time, OPS will investigate. They'll put it back to OPS.
Just want you to know, some of the mistrust or distrust in this kind of cases is because when it goes to internal affairs, people do not believe the internal affairs will really investigate on behalf of the community members, the victims.
So, yeah, and I think that there is this internal, but that community member certainly could make us aware as a body of whatever if they're dissatisfied. It doesn't matter. Doesn't mean that we will necessarily look into it, but we certainly are necessarily reinvestigate it. But there is now. This is why we're here. We understand that. There is also the other concern that both Calvin Williams and Chief Drummond have issued a kind of a stop of all officers making complaints to OPS. That seems to be unfortunate for internal issues. So I've already spoke to Mr. Van Leer, and we are thinking about what we can do about that. So, and to answer your earlier question, community members are welcome. We have to, I think, slow walk this a little bit because this committee, I think all committees have the potential, but this one especially we might be looking into confidential information. So I don't know if Mr. Goodrick has any thoughts about this. And even if it's not confidential, there has to be an agreement among the community members that what they discuss in the work group cannot just be propagated to the media, propagated in any way. If you see in the union contract, there's an agreement about names of officers and identity of officers. You can't publicize that. I think even for due process and a sense of fairness, that's right. So we would have to probably, it would not be like an open door, I guess. We would probably have to really vet the people. And it's not to just exclude anybody, but there has to be this understanding. And I don't know, I mean, I would hate for someone to have to sign a non-disclosure, but there has to be a real understanding that this is whatever comes out of this work group, and if it's not shared in the right way, it could impact all of our work. And we certainly want to be fair to both parties. So that's, so if you have any people in mind, and I do, Jim and Chandra, if you can give me other people, types of people you may need, so we can help you find those people. Probably a lawyer would be good on that work group. So we will see if maybe one of the other, I think Lou and Gordon are on that one. They might want to be on this one too, but we'll ask them if they, certainly at least it's not like static. You can just so you can get up and running and avoid the minefield a little bit. So please let me know what your needs are. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And also, I think lots of female, especially female community members, their concern is about both the internal sexual harassment, whatever, among the members of law enforcement, and also the other one is between the law reinforcement, any member from the law reinforcement, and the community member. The reason they pay attention to both is because some of them, they have been victimized, and some of them probably they wish this can be improved because they actually want to be a police officer. But when they know in the military, in the police force, female officers or female soldiers, female whatever rank you can think of, when they get harassment a lot, this has been a long history. That really discouraged them to come into this profession.
Right. So I hear you. How about this? Because it sounds like it's more connected to what Commissioner Zayed is doing. Why don't you work with her, and then we can push this back into the discipline committee, and then if there's projects, and then that work group, at least that aspect of the gender-based violence, and I really want, I should put and sexual misconduct. It's, work group. We can, if one project is ready to take sale, we can do that. So why don't you have this discussion? And I really do understand that it will be some of our most vulnerable people, not just women, but any vulnerable people that would face this, because sexual harassment, sexual assault is about power and about unequal kind of power relationships.
I just wanted to just say, just listening to Lou, and it seems like there's potentially some overlap here. That it's not just gender-based and discipline. What I hear Lou saying is that, when we look at the accountability report, there's a section on recruiting. And I think what Lou is alluding to is that there are lots of different ways that we need to diversify our police force. And one of those ways is we actually need to encourage more women to be policewomen. And if there is this low-hanging fruit of what's going to happen if there's something internally happening with women on the police force or officers and women in the community, that discourages women from wanting to be police, because women will say, well, why would I want to enter a profession where I already know that this thing is prevalent and it's not being handled properly? So while they're doing two different things, I do feel like I'm seeing like overlap, that women, without dealing with these gender-based sexual harassment, whatever the title of the committee is, so I think the point is that the way that officers are disciplined or not disciplined on these issues that are gender-based and sexual-based may have a direct impact on our ability to recruit women officers and to make the job of being a policeman something that appeals to them. It actually might make them not want to be. So I don't know. I'm just listening, and I feel like while there are two separate committees that definitely need to do the work that they're doing, it seems like there's some intersections between this discipline committee and the gender
Well, this is,
committee.
yes, and this is the reason why we've put the discipline front and center. We do because we need to know what the issues are, and then, but we also understand that there could be more focused work that's necessary eventually from the perspective of gender and sexual misconduct.
Right. I
So-
can't say what I'm saying, and I agree with you.
And with training, so training used to be
Right.
under, and it's all connected, right? So this
Right.
is the committee that sends out the signals for everything else to be, for the entire system to be.
Right, but I'm thinking about not just the training and these two work groups, but also about another part of that accountability report talks about surveys and like how we survey the communities, and it goes through the surveys that they did in the different years and the type of responses that they got back from the different demographics, and income and base and all that stuff. But I'm wondering, as the outreach committee is developing its surveys and if they're thinking about sort of how you're going to jump out into the community, I'm wondering we should think about. We haven't seen the surveys that they have did in the past, but I'm wondering if there should be something there that directly addresses what we think is maybe like some overlap or intersection. So should we
Those are not
directly
mentioned.
ask
They are
about,
not in the survey.
So if they're not, like I said, I'll take your word for it.
I have been filling out surveys
Okay.
every year.
So then maybe that's something we can consider
we
to
have
try
a
to
word.
get
They
at, right?
focus
Yeah,
on
but
excessive force, all those things are listed, but lots of the underlying issues have never been mentioned.
yeah, and I do think that the surveys, it is, again, we can't lead the witness in this, but there are ways to ask for the actual elemental data that will show what we probably intuitively already know. And I do want, because the more I look at it, I really think, I had wanted to just call this a sexual misconduct work group because we don't want to exclude the possibility that male officers or people of other genders can be, because it is, at the root of it, it is a power dynamic expressed through sexual misconduct and sexual behavior, which is not necessarily just battery. It could be like showing someone something, a type of kind of bullying and intimidation. So just to make sure that all these, anybody that could be impacted is included in this. So of course, not just to have diversity on your work group just by having people, but from their perspectives too. So not to mention my complaint against the police, that was about, I felt I was being harassed by my landlord, and the police officer said to me that he said sexual harassment really only occurs in the workplace. So which is an interesting perspective. At least he believes that it can occur in the workplace. So maybe that would be at least a door, and I think there is probably just an education involved in what sexual harassment is. It's hard for us to know. I feel like we're like watching the Anita Hill trial again, when they were all these male senators were trying to figure out what that actually meant. So probably getting some definitions would be good. I think it would be helpful to the officers. I think sometimes, like, Jim, you say like, oh, the officer's off duty and, or maybe in uniform, and ask somebody out on a date. Do they all consider that to be appropriate, inappropriate? Maybe just some guidelines on that.
We have nothing
Times
like
are
that.
changing.
I don't think anything like that, but we do have the division did have a very thorough sexual harassment policy.
But that's only for internal,
Yeah, it was internal.
for officer to officer or officer
Correct.
to their supervisor, not with community members.
Yes, correct.
This is what I also found out with you guys together during that training.
Right.
And the other thing is about the disciplinary disparity. Actually, we found out is lots of the new officers tend to be disciplined heavily.
Right. We'll get to all that.
The real crime, the people in the community think certain people they can get away with it. These are mostly with already got more years of service and maybe even higher rank. people believe these people never got disciplined.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. So I do again want us to, we have the opportunity now to have a lot of data given to us. We have the files. So I'm hoping we take a fresh look at this to see what we've missed. I know that there are low-hanging fruit, but there might be the root of something. If we take care of all this low-hanging fruit and we miss the root, we have the opportunity right now that's very singular and special to look at all the information. I know that would take time and patience, but if we can find deeper systemic ways, solutions, I think it would be, because Jim says 21 retired or quit, right? Some from 20, sometimes even from, and then 9 were in the academy. So it doesn't take a genius in math to know what's happening. So, and that, of course, the lack of staffing affects everything. You can see, as we see in the union contract, staffing was a huge issue. Okay. So I hope that we have properly covered those things. Please give me those asks and the types of kind of things you're going to look. How about you just tell me what data you want to look at and hope to uncover, and that would be good. I think Mr. Goodrick has some examples already. So if you have, maybe Mr. Goodrick can write out a few things that he wants, and then we can add to it. So. And I do, it's some way to survey the public. Surveying is just, the problem is the, how do you get a broad group of people, right? Anecdotes are very powerful, but I just want us to make sure that we don't go chasing after merely anecdotal information, as real as that experience is to that person. All right, so let's move on now to the, identification of committee mission and priorities. So the more, obviously, we're reading this for our own edification, but also to get a clearer sense of what our mission priorities are. I've already given you the update on document requests for OPS. I will try to get those legal briefs to you or those cases as soon as possible. And we're just going to start out with Dr. Adams, you had a concern. So I've asked for all of the written documentation. No body cam, nothing like that, but just the written documentation of the investigation. I looked at, when I went over the documentation we had with Mr. Goodrick, I felt it was insufficient for us to be able to write the brief. So I went to OPS. We don't have those files, so OPS has them. Hopefully they will send them, and then we could do, 1 each, 2 each, and then hopefully we'll come together with a professor and do a deeper dive into whichever case we select. Okay. But also those briefs will help us see the disciplinary process, and then the ways that things can be overturned or departed from, which is very important. I want to keep our eye on that ball. So let's go into, we're not going to discuss the discipline matrix. Let's just go over the accountability report and the union contracts. It sounds like, which would we like to do first? That there's more, since maybe we have Mr. Chura right here, maybe the union contract?
Sure.
What time is it right now? It is 4:48. Okay, so let's do that until 5:15. Okay, so for half an hour-ish. So for those listening, we are looking over the FOP union contract. There is information not just about its agreements with the cities, but its grievance and arbitration processes that will impact our ability to enforce discipline. So anybody, why don't we just go through it all? Like, I would like the sections. The first section is the Bill of Rights, which is Article 4, right? And for people's edification, Mr. Chura, that may not know that there's this contract, what happens? What is the purpose of the contract? How often is it updated? What are the things that are in the contract?
It's usually every 3 years, and it'll have related to discipline, the disciplinary procedures, the appeals process going through to the chief, the safety director, City Hall, and then it might go all the way to arbitration in certain circumstances.
Okay, great. So let's start with Article 4, which is the Bill of Rights. I think this was pertinent on page 7. Would anybody like to just read? And if there's any questions, we'll just go into those questions. Who would like to read?
I'll read it if you want.
Okay.
Article 4, Bill of Rights, bargaining unit members shall be entitled to the following rights. A, in a criminal investigation, interview, or interrogation, the members shall be provided the same constitutional and statutory safeguards afforded to all citizens. B, a bargaining unit member who is questioned as a suspect or a witness in an investigation that could lead to criminal or departmental charges shall be advised of the nature of the internal investigation prior to such questioning and will ultimately be advised as to the disposition of such investigation. C, any employee who is the subject of an investigation and who has been subjected to verbal questioning or the submission of written reports shall be notified within 10 days of a determination that the investigation is not going forward.
Okay. Are those self-evident? Shall be advised of the nature of the internal. So this is even when they're a witness to that.
Yes.
What would usually be said to them? The nature that here is the charge against you or
Right.
this officer.
It would explain that the charge is the possible circumstances of the case against them.
Okay. Any other questions? This is pretty clear.
We still got one section.
Oh, D, yeah.
Questioning or interviewing of a member in the course of an investigation will be conducted at hours reasonably related to a shift unless operational necessities require otherwise. Interrogation sessions shall be for a reasonable periods of time, and the time should be provided for rest periods and attendance to physical necessities. And they're pretty good about that.
There's more. Any other questions? No? Go on.
E, the member's home address and photograph shall not be given to the press or news media without the member's express consent. If any of the aforementioned are leaked to the media, it will not negate the division's right to proceed with the matter at hand. F, complaints against the member, when designated to be unfounded, shall not be included in the member's personnel file and shall not be used in any subsequent disciplinary proceeding or in making promotion decisions.
So I had a question for these. Where would these records be of the unfounded? Just in the OPS or IA investigation?
Yes, correct.
So are they collated somehow? Will they have, is there a way to search for it by officer name?
It wouldn't be in their personnel file. It would be into OPS or the Internal Affairs Unit.
Okay. G.
G, before a member may be charged with insubordination or like offense for refusing to answer questions or participate in an investigation, he or she shall be advised that such conduct may be the basis for such a charge. And any questions with that?
Yeah, I'm not, I think I know what it means, but if you could maybe explain.
If they're being charged in a criminal, they don't have to, they have the same rights. They could use their Miranda rights. They don't have to make a statement. If they're not going to be charged criminally, they'll be questioned under Garrity, and they'll have to make a statement, or they could be fired for not answering the questions. They'd have to make a statement, answer the questions, and any of the answers couldn't be used in a criminal prosecution, but it could be used to have you disciplined and fired from the police department.
Okay. Great. H.
Evidence obtained in the course of an investigation through the use of an administrative pressure, threats, coercion, or promises shall not be admissible in any subsequent criminal action.
Okay.
In the event of formal disciplinary hearing is held, the members shall have the right to request the presence of legal counsel and/or one representative from the officially recognized FOP, and the attorney and a representative shall have the rights of cross-examination.
I just have one question. In H, can you give us some examples of administrative pressure that are subtle?
I can't think of anything at this time. I mean, they might make promises, something like that, but
Promote like a better shift or
nothing's going to happen to you, things of that nature.
okay.
Okay,
J.
The representative for the city and the representative for a bargaining unit member who has been charged with disciplinary rules violations, or the bargaining unit member himself is not represented, shall provide each other prior to commencement of disciplinary hearings with a list of all persons who will testify at the hearing, and shall provide copies of factual statements concerning the subject matter of the administrative charges of witnesses who actually testify at the hearing, provided that such disclosure of witnesses or statements will not compromise any criminal or internal investigation or compromise the promise of confidentiality previously given to such witness. The city will provide the bargaining unit member prior to hearing copies of his or her own written statements or reports regarding the matter that is in the subject of the hearing. Failure to comply with the terms of this provision will not affect the validity of any discipline imposed. Both parties agree that they will have a reasonable postponement of the hearing to exchange information subject to the above restrictions on disclosure.
So I had a question. What do you think is in practice is reasonable postponement? What time period? And does that affect our accountability work in any way, Jason? That postponement?
Okay, sorry, can you repeat the?
So, something it have like, let's see, representative for a bar.
So I want to make one important point
This is a list.
about the union contract. We're not in it. So we don't yet know what that means, right? So a lot of times it discusses, specifically the relationship between the chief's discipline and the process that follows, or the safety director's discipline and the process that follows. We have not been addressed in negotiation or the contract that I've seen so far, right? So when we have council come in here, I think we can ask specific questions about what that means for us. But right now, the answer is very broad and open to many different opinions on how something can happen and how we fit into this process, right? We know that the wording in 115.5 says we are the final authority on discipline. What does that mean? Does it mean, like in Chicago, they cannot go to arbitration with a decision from their police review board, okay? It's because they're outside the contract. So arbitration happens on a different cycle, and then the police review board can impose final discipline that the only place an officer can go is to the Cook County court system to oppose it, because it's a different structure and they are not in the collective bargaining agreement. So the collective bargaining agreement is between the city of Cleveland, the executive branch, and the division of police. It's not between the commission and the division of police. So there's a lot of interesting nuances here that we'll have to get outside opinion on how we fit into that. And without, me being a labor law expert, I wouldn't opine on what that means for us or anything like that. I do know timelines are important. So, when we create our rules, timelines will be very important. But things like access to disciplinary records, right? That is negotiated when it, and it doesn't apply to us. So the 3 or 5 years, I think it's up to 5 years now, or I don't recall right off the top of my head, but that doesn't apply to us. We have access to full records of the entire employment in our decision making, because it doesn't specifically exclude the commission in the contract from only seeing 3 years, right? So there's nuances here that we don't quite know how it applies to us yet. So keep that in mind. This is this agreement between the executive branch of the city and the Department of Public Safety and the 2 unions, FOP and CPPA.
Okay, thank you. I do want us to always be mindful of these time periods, because they're very important, I think, once we see the steps. Go ahead.
Are you talking about the postponement part of the?
Yeah, so I don't know, later on, there's like all these times that you have to fulfill. And if it doesn't get fulfilled, what we'll see sometimes is that we'll see once I get the files that often there could be a reason that the chief or the safety director reverses something if a certain time kind of deadline has not been fulfilled.
Yeah, it just looks like that Jay is talking about sort of making sure that everyone gets documents in a timely fashion. Mm-hmm. And that the line that kind of stands out to me is this idea of the failure to comply with the terms of this provision will not affect the validity of any discipline imposed. So it doesn't seem like it would affect the outcome per se. So I guess how I read it is that there's an expectation that documentation is between whoever's accusing the police and the police will happen in a timely fashion. If that doesn't happen, if there was a delay for whatever reason, that it's not going to affect the discipline that's imposed. However, due to the fact that the documents from whichever side may not have been received in the time frame that was set out, that what either party or both parties can agree to is to postpone perhaps the next steps to make sure that everyone has all the information that they're supposed to get before they move on to the next steps.
Yeah, but this is not between the community member, this is between the city and the union.
Right.
Right, so that it would not be, so I just found it was interesting to, I mean, do you think this has any effect? Say that there was some unfortunate, if they postponed, does that affect the other timeline for discipline in any way? It shouldn't at this step, right? It's confusing because it's like.
Yeah,
we
to
don't
the
have
chair there, it's again, if, and Jim would probably know more, the contract says what it says, right? But that's why arbitrators sometimes have to come in and determine, what that means. Does that technicality in the contract defeat the discipline in the end, right? So that's where that decision would be made. It would be up to an arbitrator to say, there's a foul in the process, therefore the discipline is not appropriate, right? So how does that matter? It's written down for a reason, so everything that's written down matters, right? So they wouldn't put timelines in there if it didn't matter. And they want discipline to be under the consent decree. What matters is timelines, because sometimes it would be years between a complaint and whatever. So every step in this, whether it's in the contract or in the consent decree, is designed to getting these things adjudicated timely, right, and efficiently. So those things are important, and sometimes I have seen where the technicality of it negates the discipline because it wasn't done timely, efficiently, things weren't shared appropriately, etc. So.
So one thing I was confused about is, the majority of the OPS complaints are taking more than 6 months to move through the system, correct? From the time that the complaint is received to the investigation happens. So, in looking at, as long as I was looking at on page 7, or no, sorry, page 9, as long as the complaint is filed within 6 months,
Yeah.
is it the entire process has to be finished within 6
I think
months?
it's what it's, but wasn't there something about 3 years that has to be completed or something? You filed before 6 months. Yeah.
So then there's no, and then what is does the,
But the longer the investigation goes, the more
Right.
trying it is for the party that is has less resources, right? To wait there. We saw a lot of OPS investigations go stale because the person wasn't located. I myself had moved because it took me over a year.
Right.
Yeah, it would be good. I mean, I know Ryan's making that chart. It would be
That's
great.
What I was
To-
gonna
yeah.
say. So the reason that we are, and it's on here later, an update on a project that we have decided to undertake, is to map out in the best way, shape, and form possible so everyone understands the disciplinary process in Cleveland. When I sat down and tried to do it myself, I couldn't answer every question I had about it. So it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. So we're going to do some flow charts that show, the discipline process from the 2 tracks, where it's supposed to be at certain times, right? So we have something to look at and say, where should this thing be, according to all these different doctrines, the union contract, the consent decree, right? And that way we know how well they're following due process and their own timelines, right? And the union contracts and their rights and all of those things for due process and timeline. So it's very important to look at that. So we are in the process of doing that, and hopefully we can have it here within a few weeks.
And then I have one more question.
Okay, okay. You want to?
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead. So in that part, I think I'm starting to get my eyes are going a little cross-eyed, but I can't remember if we've read this part yet, but about the if it's not through a citizen complaint, if it's like the department becomes aware of what happened, it's 6 months from the time that the chief becomes aware of it. And I was curious, like, how generally is that, like, somebody says something to the chief, does it have to be in writing? Like, when something formal was given to the chief, if you had any idea of, like,
If,
what?
like a supervisor, if a supervisor discovers something watching, the body cam or something of that nature, then, he would write up, and they have a blue team. It's called Blue Team is the system they use to report, those kind of allegations, complaints. They do everything on Blue Team now, almost everything. Some of the IA investigations are on a different system, but they would document it there, and then that would probably start the clock running.
Oh,
Okay, if it's a minor violation, anything criminal, then that could take, it's a whole different story.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So possible. So one check on this is to make when we make these, flow charts, to do it also from the perspective of the citizen, to empower them, because they would be the check on the system. They can make the complaint too. And that would start the process in case there's divergence in understanding of whether a complaint should have been made. So, okay, now I think Kay will explain a little bit more where we are. The step 3 or 3A is in the grievance process, right? Okay, if any of these, you want to keep reading, or we can pass the baton. Oh, I'm sorry, you had a comment.
Yeah, we can come back to L and M, but I'm still stuck on J. This line that I read: failure to comply with the terms of this provision will not affect the validity of any discipline imposed. So I'm thinking about sort of that line, and I'm thinking, like, who's imposing the discipline, right? So this contract was agreed upon before we even applied to be on the commission. This contract was passed before we even were selected and sworn in. So that means, because the previous commission, which is now dissolved after the passage of issue 24, there literally is no commission really in place to even recommend discipline for them on these things. So when I'm reading this is literally the chief of police and the safety director who's going to be able to, this little section, I don't know why it's bothering me. But I feel like in this scenario, not to be sort of like a conspiracy person, but theoretically, there could be some dragging of your feet on certain things. There could be a postponement because things have not been shared in a particular time frame, and then you're going to decide on what the discipline is, and then the discipline stands, right?
Right, so if you're saying if information
Right.
wasn't shared,
It's just
that would be
this whole process
accessible,
allows,
or-
because in the end,
right.
there's no authority there to actually challenge the discipline that you're going to impose on the officers in these scenarios.
Yeah, is there like a?
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like concerning that you're in charge of the discipline, and then you write this provision that the discipline still stands, even if the process is a little flawed. Like, it just feels like that all doesn't really seem right to me. It's different now that we're in place, but I just find that language to be interesting, that the process can be flawed, yet the discipline still stands, and the people who are, your response. Yeah, you guys get what I'm saying.
To the chair, the law department had initially agreed to send their labor attorneys here to go over questions about the contract with you. They still haven't done that. So in the interest of time, you gave yourself 15 minutes. I don't think you're going to get through this. And there's a lot of speculation about what all this means. My suggestion would be that if you want the city's negotiators and labor attorneys to come, and you can reinvite CPPA back if you want, or FOP back if you want, here to this committee to have this discussion alongside with you. You can read these things, have a list of questions for them. That was the design intent of the training. So I recommend that, since we're pretty booked on the full commission meetings, that perhaps we can do that invite to the next accountability committee meeting. We can have the labor law people come and explain the contract, what these provisions mean in their perspective, why they are there, and you can ask questions, and instead of speculating, we can get real answers from one side of the argument, right? So that is my suggestion, in the interest of time, that you perhaps table this and move to bring that person in so you can ask them questions about the contract and what these things all mean in the long run.
So, okay, I will partially accept that. I think we should move on to if we have Mr. Chura here, he can explain at least the grievance procedure to us, right? Just the steps, which is later on. Yeah, I think, and once we map out, you can sense where either side could maneuver and manipulate the situation. So I think those are not things that necessarily, I think the chart would actually help. It's not necessarily, it's fairly well written contract. I think if we visually see it, it would be better. But if we just so we can have a brief insight as to, Jim, if you could just walk us through once and then we can read it.
Okay.
Tell us what it was like. Okay.
Well, if you were you were disciplined and you didn't think the discipline was just, and your union thought the same thing, and the chief imposed discipline, he could discipline up to 10 days, no more. If the union thinks the discipline is too excessive, they would appeal it to the safety director. That would be the next step. And then from the that would be step 3. And then step 3A is the labor relations attorney at City Hall. And it's pretty much a rubber stamp of whatever the safety director is going to say. So from there, if you can't come to terms on it, the union would usually discuss the case with their union committees, their executive committee, and decide if they want to go forward with into arbitration, which is expensive. You got to hire lawyers and everything else. But if they feel that it's a violation of the contract, they'll take it to arbitration. And arbitration could go either way. I've seen arbitrators that take copious notes. I've seen arbitrators that just sat there and drank coffee and ate donuts. And it depends on the arbitrator. But the city and the union both agree on the arbitrator. So whoever they pick, they both have to just live with the results of that, and that's usually the final outcome, one way or the other.
Yeah, so there's lots of deadlines in this and times. What's interesting, so it is the executive committee that decides whether it goes to
Right, correct, of the union.
Who is on the executive committee?
It'll be the president, vice president, probably all the union, the major officers that are elected.
And how do they come to a decision as to?
They'll discuss the situation, the facts of the case, and decide which way they want to go.
Is the officer present?
Usually not.
Usually not. So how do they get information from?
Oh, the case will already be decided by the chief, or sometimes the safety director, wherever the case goes to. And from there, all the facts will be already laid out with the union attorneys. They'll already be familiar with the case because they'll be there every step of the way through the process. What
usually are the criteria to move it forward to arbitration because it's expensive and the ones to move?
You know what? It just depends. If it's something that's maybe not well defined and it's affecting other members, they might go through with it.
So
or something, if the discipline becomes political, something of that nature, excessive, they'll usually arbitrate it then.
So does the officer have any other remedies if the executive committee refuses to go forward with arbitration?
That's usually it then. It usually ends the process. I know with the FOP, we had a couple way back in the day where a sergeant was up for promotion to lieutenant, and he tested positive for marijuana on a drug test, and it was brought up at the union meeting, and the executive committee said no, we're not going to arbitrate this. Basically at that time he was breaking the law. So.
All right. So, and then you said if it goes directly to the safety director when it's more than 10 days, it's the same process, right?
Whatever the situation is, what is it? 30 days, 10 days, usually within 10 days.
Okay. Do we have any questions on this issue? I know there was a brief, but those days are important. what if one side doesn't fulfill these deadlines? What happens usually?
They'll bring that up like if in an arbitration, hey, this should have been done already, but, so that might affect the arbitration, but, it's pretty clear, the days, the deadlines. I remember one time learning the hard way when I was a sergeant in, the motorcycle unit. We have different traffic controllers, have a different union, and we had to get to notify these traffic controllers that were going up on charges. So they called in sick, took a couple of days off, whatever it was, so they weren't notified in a timely manner. So after that, I made sure that, no matter what, I go out to their house if I had to and notify them that they're going up on charges. But with these procedures, everybody that's involved in this is involved in it for years, so I don't think it very rarely happens that any of the time limits are missed.
How many arbitrations has the FOP done in the last 5 years?
Oh, I have no idea.
Not very many.
I don't believe that's a last resort. Like I said, it's expensive.
Okay. Can the but it can be also resolved in the grievance procedure, right? Is it likely?
I mean, that's the final, but you take your grievance all the way to the arbitrator and state your case, the city will state their case, and then he decides, and that's it.
But there's multiple steps that it.
Yes, multiple steps, like I said, the chief makes a decision and they don't like it, or the safety director, they'll take it to the next level. From the safety director, they could take it to the labor relations attorney for the city. And then from there, they have to decide if it's denied there, it'll go to arbitration.
Is arbitration completely paid off out of officer union dues?
I believe so.
That would be.
Is
really
it shared costs between the city and the? I think it
Not
said
that I'm
something-
aware of.
It said something about in the CPPA contract. I mean, is there an imbalance between, like, is there a difference in proportion of how many grievances and arbitrations?
I would say probably the CPPA has more because they have more members and it's a more wider variety of things that they might be looking at or be investigated for. FOP probably not so much.
Have they ever done like a group of officers, like a class arbitration?
Oh yes, they've done multiple. Every officer has their own hearing, but yeah, there's been multiple multiple arbitrations at one time. Not all at one time. Like each officer has their own, but it could be ongoing for a month to take care of 10 officers, whatever it might be.
And if the officer's also involved in like the Black Shield or Hispanic Association, where do those representatives fit into this structure? Are they allowed to have them during hearings or?
They're more of it's more the FOP and the CPPA. The other two are more like social.
Do they get like advocacy from them, like at
They
the
could
hearing?
they could have them at a meeting. They're always at the chief's office for different disciplinary hearings if they want them there. If an officer wants a Black Shield representative or a Hispanic Officers Association there, they'll let them have a representative there for sure.
And so, are there officers that are not in these unions, or all of them covered?
If you requested not to be in the union and you weren't paying your dues, they would still have to represent you. I think based on labor law.
But there are some officers that are not.
I'm not aware of any there now, but I know there was some probably just to go against the grain that says I don't want to pay any union dues.
How much are the union dues?
I have no idea right now.
I guess is it?
I'm not going to take a guess. I don't know.
Okay, all right. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I think also looking at the sick leave is very important in this section. So I would just, again, it's a lot of information. So I would encourage everyone to keep reading and reading over and over again until our eyes cross and everything. We don't remember exactly where the item came from. All right, so if are there any comments from our audience? All right. So we can move on to the Accountability Committee report. And for this, I would just want your feedback as to anything that jumped out at you as potential priorities. And Mr. Kubrick, we could have your feedback too. They were operating with less, I think, power and access to documents than we are. So let's keep that in mind. Was there any things that we wanted to do in any, Ms. Benito?
One thing, as I was reading through all of the recommendations in the report, is there were some things that I thought okay, I'm pretty sure this maybe is being done now. I'm pretty sure this isn't being done now, but it was hard to know like the status of
Mhm.
all of the things. And so I think that could be something that might be helpful with to like go over with either Executive Director Goodrich or have like a kind of an update to the report made of the status of some of these, or
Why don't we just go through it? We have plenty of time, because we've already done the old business. So why don't we just go through the recommendations in every section? Mr. Goodrich, so the first one is consent decree surveys. Are there longitudinal the first thing talks about longitudinal surveys. Are there ones being done right now? No.
you might want to pull up a seat now.
Yeah, I'm gonna need my computer because I wasn't prepared for this conversation. So
Good things. To the chair, no, there has not been a monitoring team survey conducted in maybe 1, 2, 3. We did it twice, so it's maybe been before 2020 was the last one. So
It was 2018.
yeah, it's been a while. And then our surveys have been conducted twice in back-to-back years. And Ryan has presented those to outreach already, so.
And so what was the, okay, so item 2, it said that she used the original title. Did they change the title at some point? So she used the
Our
original-
survey has, we were restricted to asking questions only related to the consent decree. So this was pre-115.5, so we had to narrow it to the scope of policies that are related to the consent decree, which is a big enough scope, but this time around we can add questions that are outside the scope of the consent decree if we chose, because we're not, it wouldn't be outside of our power to do so now.
Okay, number 3 says to expand the demographics. The LGBTQIA community is mentioned. I also noticed that there's no indication Asian, Native Americans, Middle Eastern populations were surveyed.
And
Or
to
distinctively
the chair, if you're discussing the survey, yes, there was points made that, and I think if you watch the outreach committee, our senior policy analyst, Mr. Walker, explained, we were asking for participation, right? It's different than targeted populations. So when you ask for participation, what we found is we tend to get skewed data to higher educated than what Cleveland mostly is, and also more Caucasian than Cleveland is. So when we push these surveys out, we try to work with community groups. We go to places where there's demographics that we're hoping to achieve a broader perspective, and even in doing that, without having a guaranteed access to people. So there are companies that get you guaranteed access to demographics. We didn't have that. So there is no guarantee that we'll hit our marks unless we use services like a lot of colleges or universities or other places do when they want to do this, or marketing firms when they're looking for specific groups. There are companies out there and organizations that have access to those groups that are paid to provide that access. So we've never tried that. We tried a mailer, and it was a randomized mailer to zip codes, and even that failed to produce anything. We spent $4,000 on that, and we checked good addresses against voter registration, so we had some demographic data, hoping that if we blanketed enough houses of demographic data we were looking for, we would get responses, and it was a failure through mail. So
is the outreach committee working on some survey options, or do you want to give an update?
Yeah, so right now we have a work group that is coming together to update that survey, and also we're discussing methods to get the survey out. We're meeting today at 6. We'll discuss that more.
Okay, let's make sure, think of ways. I mean, it's always an issue, but if it's targeted demographics that are missing, we might, there are groups and neighborhoods that we may need to just find people to
we
walk.
are aware of that issue.
Yeah.
We're developing ways to remedy that.
Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna move on to hiring section. Interesting story. I've never heard of Sean Simmons. Do you want to give us some background about that officer?
I get to pull up the report here. That does not ring an immediate.
This was the an officer that had committed.
Yes, there was an officer who they found overseas had, well, yeah, so they, they didn't do, the moral of that story, without going into details, was it was about background investigation. So you can look at several iterations of the monitoring team's reports where there has been concerns about the background investigations of officers not being thorough enough. A lot of times there's, in the monitor's reports, they were saying they have concerns about the time spent on them, the depth of the investigations, et cetera, et cetera. That is, I believe, even echoed in the 12th, so it's still a persistent problem. So it is something that remains unresolved, but we are not the only group that ever looked at it and said, you need to do better. One thing they did correct, so in their defense, was the issue of lateral transfers. So I think they are no longer doing lateral recruitment or lateral transfers. They may be switching a position on that, but we also had a problem with background checks on lateral transfers and a few instances where after they got the division records from their previous employment, there was some question on if they meet the community standards in the consent decree based on what they're looking for. And their last lateral class was very small. It was only like 5 officers, so they just weren't getting a lot of lateral interest anyhow. So I think at the time they agreed to put a pause on that. So there were 2 points: the broader investigations, and then investigations when we try to short track people who are already police officers to fill vacancies. Both had some issues outstanding.
Okay. So these hiring recommendations basically existed to ask more questions and provide and ask, but it seems to be very contingent on the candidates providing this information, including their employment history. Is there anything that the team came up with or can think of that we can do to better facilitate?
Right now, I think they're talking about in policy looking at recruitment, so that could probably come there. I don't know if you want to. I don't think right now. The monitoring team's already addressing that. They're watching it, so we'll see what happens. But I don't know if there's anything new we can contribute that hasn't already been said, or anything that we can do right in this moment that wouldn't require a lot more time, energy, and effort than the work groups you already have established. So, if you want to put it in your 18-month plan to look at that later, but I don't think that particular thing fits in any of the work groups you already have established at the moment.
Okay.
So this was a very broad report.
Okay, so any other questions about that? Move on to training, which I mean, I guess we can. That's really because it used to be under accountability, the training work group. So, any thoughts on that since Dr. Adams is here? Did you have any thoughts about that? And it's
I guess like my biggest question that I had from what I read in the training section was I wondered if some of these recommendations, like have they been addressed, have they been updated? Like for example, on page 8, that second bullet point says the concept and definition of the word culture must be expanded beyond race, ethnicity, and or orientation. We seem to be talking about these demographics issues often. Culture includes age, income, education, etc. And I guess for the recommendations, I just sort of was wondering if they've actually been addressed or if they've been updated. So I guess that was like one of my biggest takeaways from the training. And I guess the other thing for me, and this has been something that I haven't really brought to the commission, but we've had so much going on. But I really, and this is in the consent decree as well, but I'm still questioning the structures and effectiveness of the district awareness, these district meetings that, the community meetings that they have every month. I know, I've attended a few, and I'm still not convinced that they are in complete compliance with the consent decree. So I guess like mine was just more thinking about, this was written in 2019. My biggest takeaway would be, I would want to look at the recommendations and then sort of go back and ask if anything's been done on them. And if they have not, then I think that's something that the training committee should take up and address.
To the chair, training has leapt forward a great deal, and there was a separate report that was spawned out of this, a whole nother project from this accountability committee specifically around training. So I will send that to you, but I think that Commander Magooth has already incorporated a tremendous amount of feedback in both this report and the subsequent report where we analyzed training curriculum and made some recommendations there to this committee. So I can do that. I am searching there was a formal response from CDP to this report. So I'm trying to find that right now. Again, I didn't know we were having this conversation, or I would have been better prepared to, if I had known we were going through each point in this report, I could have done some research to get us exactly where we're at in time with this. So I'm doing the best I can here off the top of my head.
Okay, no problem. I mean, if we could just get an update. The one thing I wanted to talk about that it is in training, but the implicit bias training, we mentioned during one of our trainings that there's mixed results that we found. And I'm just thinking from an accountability, it's not that I, don't want that to be there, but it should be done in a position of positive enforcement, right? Because at some point it recommended that they go over the implicit bias results with their supervisors, and I felt a little bit uneasy by that because it could be a moment of real realization for some people, and it would be a better is someone to explain to them that you can use this information in a positive way and not in a self-condemnatory way. So I don't know, that information is very powerful, but I think it has to be connected to something, some training that's a little bit more constructive.
Commissioner Benito, I know this was a part of the last round of recommendations that we sent to the police, and I think that's sort of a dialogue that we're having right now. When we talk about the biased police, actually we have like 4 members of the committee here right now. But we were talking about this idea of like, is it really how do you actually train people to identify their implicit bias, right? I think it was Commissioner Benito who made the recommendation that perhaps that type of training, what we can train people on are their explicit biases.
I made
right?
the same point, yeah.
So that was like one of the recommendations. That's one of the conversations that we were having, and one of the recommendations that we sent back with our feedback was that you can't, like, part of what this accountability report talks about is like having measurable outcomes. How do you measure if you've helped somebody identify their, implicit biases, right? Like the whole challenge of implicit biases is I don't think most of us think that we have implicit biases. So first you have to convince the person that they have them, and then convince them what they are. But we can identify the explicit biases, stereotypes, and things like that, things that are historical a little bit better. So I think that where we are now, and you can add what you need to add, and you can correct anything that I've said that might not be completely accurate. But I think we feel more comfortable that it is measurable in some ways to stop people from stopping people. Sorry, it's been a very long day. To stop officers from stopping people for reasons like I had someone share a story with me where a police officer saw them, they were driving, police officer literally rolled up next to them to see who was in the car. And then once they saw it was a black woman, then they decided they were going to pull them over. Right? So we can stop officers from doing things like that. So I think that's sort of where it's a conversation that is happening. But I don't know if Benito wants to chime in.
Yeah, that was an area on the preload where we had some feedback, and I sent some like additional notes to Commander McGuth and Lieutenant Ryan, and we kind of had a conversation about, a lot of the topic in the preload. I mean, it was just a couple slides because, it's like every, they have like a couple of topics that they kind of do reminders about. And some of, I think there was this one thing that we all kind of read in the preload that was like, be sure to be aware of your implicit biases. And it was like, that's the hard thing about implicit biases is you're often unaware. But we did have, some of the challenges was with them redoing that section or updating that section. We don't know exactly what the results are because then they were also sending the preload and the curriculum to the courts for their approval. So we won't know exactly what kind of changes they're making. But we talked in some of the challenges is that they really have to, there's a lot of bias-free policing language, like all the definitions of what implicit biases and explicit biases and what they what they should be doing is in the bias-free policing policy. And so there's a lot of language that they can't change because it's actual GPO. And so one thing that we talked about is I think that the bias-free policing policy is like in the review calendar for in the next year. So like kind of doing some coordinated work between the policy committee and the training committee to see, can we look at the policy from the lens of how would we train on this? And then we talked about like kind of looking ahead to next year with what they might include on training on bias-free policing and kind of working with them ahead of time. But yeah, so.
Yeah, so I do want to, again, there's still a nuance, I think, because I brought this up in that training meeting, there's still a nuance that we're missing. It's not just implicit, to my understanding, it's not just implicit bias and explicit bias, it's just explicit behavior. And I don't think it's fair to go on record saying to a police officer, if you see Jim and, and then you say, well, he did X behavior, it was because of his bias. I think that's very concerning to trace back like that, unless it's explicit, like Jim says something that shows racial animus. I just want to be very careful. I think we're here to look at the conduct, and if the conduct of multiple officers shows something systemically, I think you can say something systemic and historical about that. But I do want to make the point that implicit bias is not just about those racial demographics. People can have bias against any number of things. The color orange over the color blue. I'm not, trying to diminish the impact of implicit bias, but as I shared with Commissioner Benito once, we are not psychologists. We are here in this committee to look at behavior, right? There's no way, I don't think it's right. Say an officer had implicit bias against like women, right? And it's shown by the IAT, which is still not a fully, there's some flaws in the test. What will we do with that information?
I think you're drawing too many conclusions from the example that I use. I just use one example. Of course, we know that there's different type of biases besides race, but there are racial biases. And when you are in a city where the majority of the citizens are black and the majority of the police are white, and there's a long history there, like we have a report from the CPC that's 100 years of these type of patterns that you're talking about. And they're racial, a lot of them. But they are. So what we should not do is minimize the impact that race is having on the history of the interactions with the people, citizens of Cleveland, and the police. What I think we should do is broaden how we look at these biases. It doesn't mean that the racial biases are not present and that they're not at the center and that they're not important. But what is most likely is that these racial biases are also intersecting with the fact that Cleveland is a poor city, right? So you're not just dealing with Black people, you're also dealing with Black people who are living underneath the poverty line, right? Like that matters. And then that also means, as we were talking before, that you're probably also dealing with women, right? Women of all backgrounds. And it's not just Black women who are vulnerable in our society. Like there's women of other backgrounds, other ethnicities who are also vulnerable. So we do need to focus on race. We do need to make sure that race is at the center of our analysis, but we also need to ensure that race is not the only marker at the center of our analysis, that race in a city like Cleveland is intersecting with so many other identity categories for people that we should broaden it and expand it, but I would always push back on minimizing the role that race plays in policing in a majority Black city.
Well, again, I didn't minimize the role of it.
But that's
And-
what it,
but
I mean, you're,
I know that
but
you're-
do
I
think
know
there's
you-
a pattern though,
I-
right?
It's not a pattern, and I really am very tired of you suggesting that. You've suggested that before in front of the camera about me and to other people. And I have to say, I don't know if you've studied the implicit bias research, because what I said in that training was unfortunately true, that because of the historical power of white supremacy, the historical, its ability to impact everybody, you do have also Black Americans showing antipathy towards other Black Americans. But you're missing the point that I'm making is that what it's shown is that implicit bias doesn't necessarily map to explicit behavior. You know?
Again,
And we're
as
going
the
to do.
person with the PhD in African American history, I'm not going to be lectured to about the history of Black Americans in America from someone who does not have a background in it. So I don't need.
And I
okay,
wasn't finished
listen,
speaking.
Yeah,
So
but I'm
please.
just going to just put that out there. I'm
This
talking
is-
about broadening this, not narrowing it down.
But you're broadening it with centering something that is not necessarily.
What's that something?
That's race.
So
What?
it should be at the center?
So you're already presuming that is. So you're going to say to a white officer that because they're white, therefore this.
No, I'm not saying
I'm
that.
sorry,
What
but
I'm
you're
saying
centering.
is- What I'm saying is that we have enough research. We have enough data. We have it even on our own commission. The commission has already done this work. The research of this history has been done. There are patterns. The patterns exist.
Yes, but
the patterns exist
finish
in
this.
places
I see what the problem
all
is.
over the country. There's a reason why. There's a reason why so many places in America are under a consent decree right now, right? If we look at those patterns in those places, there is a pattern of racial discrimination. So I didn't say it was the only thing
But you're
that
again.
factors into it. I'm not backing down on this because the data
But
supports what I'm saying.
But you're
And
missing.
there's
You're
no
missing my.
argument that
Let
needs-
me.
there's
Let me.
argument that needs to be
Let
made. Like
me.
what we
Let
need
me
to be talking
finish my
about
point
is
though.
what is happening on the accountability committee, which you chair, and you need to let me chair the training committee. If you would like to make a comment about what's going on with bias-free policing and what is going on with implicit bias and what is
Dr.
going on
Adams,
with
please let me
explicit bias,
speak.
then I invite you to come
Please
to
let me
our
speak,
meeting
but
on
we
Wednesday.
can't-
You can talk
We
about it.
cannot have a conversation because you're making a very logical fallacy right now. You're taking historical patterns that exist over a group, and you're ascribing that type of analysis to a single officer. That's what I'm opposing. So why do you think that that's okay? So every person that is of a particular race that fits a particular historical truth, it is truth.
I'm not the one speaking in absolutes.
You are though. That's
No,
what you're
you are.
saying. You're saying
No.
because of you said that in that example. You said that because of
Teri.
historical things we know, therefore that officer has to.
Once
That was the
again,
bias that was shown to
I
that
think
female.
this is like not productive. I think this is not productive, and I think
Ju-
that we should get back to the agenda.
We are going to
I
that
don't
agenda.
think
It's
this- I
very,
just don't
it's
think this is
very,
productive.
it's very concerning to me.
That's fine.
that
We can have a conversation
very-
offline then, but we should stick to
we-
the business and we
We
should
cannot,
move the business of this committee
we've had
forward.
conversations about this offline.
I'm gonna suggest that we.
And I will
move
ask
the
you,
business of this
I will
committee
ask
forward.
you very upfront, if you cannot, if you're going to bring certain ideologies that are unfair to individual officers, I would like you to say that right now.
Listen, I know you like your moments.
This
I
is
think
not,
we
oh
should
my
stick
gosh.
to the business of the commission.
This is the business of the accountability
Okay.
committee, because we're going to be deciding the
I
fate of
don't see that.
officers and the fate of
I
people
don't
in
see
the
it on the
community.
agenda anywhere. So I'm just gonna say, I just think we should get back to the
This
business.
is not, this, we're
of the
going over the
committee.
report.
I think that we should let the data drive the work. So either way it goes, you know, whatever issues that we have, we'll let the numbers determine the priorities of things, and we don't have them in front of us right now, so can we move on?
I guess what I'm trying to say is, you cannot dismiss.
No one's
You
dismissing it.
cannot.
I agree with
You
you. If that's
cannot
the main issue,
dismiss.
that's what we need to
You
focus
can't
on.
dismiss
We can't
that I
do
have
right now.
that I literally have spent a lot of my life researching and studying this stuff. Like I feel like I hear what you're saying. I wouldn't make these statements if I didn't know what I was talking about. So I don't think you've read more than I've read on this
Well,
particular subject. And
but
you're
listen-
entitled to your opinion.
No, you're
I'm
wrong
talking
about
about-
this, because I have,
Listen,
please let me finish, because you've given
Oh,
your
goodness.
credentials.
Sure.
I have studied this as a scientist for a very long time, from the very beginning, because the research started at Harvard. So are you able to analyze this
Point of
research
order.
from a scientific point of view?
Point of order, you guys have both gone through back and forth more than
So
3
it's
times,
okay,
so I
it's
think other
okay. I
commissioners.
mean, it's fine. We will move on. We will move on. Thank
You
you.
wanna speak?
I just wanted to do a quick 13-minute time
Okay,
check
sure.
for the rest of the meeting. And I think also I just would encourage us to, a lot of this work is going to be connected to the work that other committees are doing. I think in this particular subject, Dr. Adams and I were giving an update based on what's happening in the training committee. And so I think that, it will just be careful for us, to try to have some of these conversations in the committees that we're addressing that work in. And so I just wanted
Unfortunately,
to say that.
Ms. Benito, as I said before, the training committee originally was under accountability. And I think that it's concerning to me that particular people's ideologies are driving their ability to look accurately. That would be for all of you. None of our ideologies should be driving. If an Asian immigrant came up into a case, I would have to be aware of my biases, positive biases.
I want to say that I don't think that we should be saying that any commissioner, I haven't seen anything from Dr. Adams that makes me think that he can't look at this.
Dr. Adams has
Fairly.
never, ever
And I don't think this
advocated
is an
for
appropriate
any-
conversation for
No,
this
I'm
meeting.
sorry, but Dr. Adams had never advocated for any other racial minority except for Black Americans. I've never heard him say one thing. So, all right, we will move on to public comment now.
I mean, what can you say to that? It's just always disparaging people.
I'm not disparaging, I'm stating the truth.
That's all we do is attack people.
John, please, if you want to say something to me, you can, but don't deflect.
Let's go into public comment, please.
You're not the chair of the committee. Would you please stay in order?
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have any public comment? No? Okay, then we will move on to what we are going to be assigned for next week. So everybody knows what they are where I would like to have as many meetings as possible for us to get through the information. Do you want to meet in 2 weeks or 1 week?
I'm okay
We're
with
gonna have,
whatever.
Yeah.
I'm okay with whatever.
okay,
I think I like the idea though about bringing in the the labor attorney.
Yeah, because it was like almost pointless going through that.
Right. And then I think one thing, I appreciated Executive Director Goodrick's willingness to go through it kind of ad hoc, but maybe that's something that we could, prepare, I hate to add more things to the plate, but just for us to be able then to get on the list of recommendations, just even just like nothing's been done in progress, and then we can have a conversation from there. So maybe we can ask somebody from the CPC staff if they can do that, and then we could use that.
Well, I mean, I think yes, when can we get the labor attorney? If not, then we need to move on with other, I don't think we should be reading it and
Yeah.
probably having questions, so we're not reading in the moment.
I like how you
Oh, I
did
did,
the questions next to it, maybe we can.
yeah. If we can get I had questions, I wanted to share the PDF, but it's unfortunately a scanned PDF, so I'm trying to get a version that I can share.
Highlighted sections, put questions next
Oh,
to
nice.
it. It would be good if it was like something shared that we can see that each person
Yeah.
has a question next to it. I don't know if Jason did that.
Okay,
Jason,
So-
can you do anything?
I appreciate your confidence, but I fall far short of anything standards.
I would prefer, if we can, to meet more regularly, because we have a lot, this committee has a lot to learn, you know,
I'm
I
saying 2 weeks or.
I
That's
will
just too
be gone at some point, so I'm just trying to, I'll be gone for like a month or a half, and if something occurs, my goal is to have us at least up and running, such that, you know, if something unfortunately happens, that you guys can continue.
Is your plan to have us meet while you're gone? I know someone we've done that in some of the other committees.
I would like to not necessarily meet when I'm gone, because I will be in another country. I would call in, you know, but it might be hard, and I don't know. I guess we can talk about that. Obviously, if it's an emergency, then sure. But there is, I mean, this committee has a lot of, because it's so broad in its foundation, it has a lot of things to read. So, you know, I would like to, it's a lot to go through every 2 weeks, and I'm getting the feeling, you know, that a lot of us are reading it at the last moment, which may not be the best for us. So if we can read less and just meet more, even for like an hour or something, you know, or less, just so we can go through.
I would rather have, if the choice is more frequent meetings for 1 hour versus less meetings for 2 hours, I would prefer that, just because schedules, I'm driving from Lorraine for work, so it's a long way to drive for.
Okay,
So I would rather
So
do
let's
that.
do 2. We already had the 15th reserved as our regular meeting.
Jason, is there any other meetings with other committees that?
My vote is gonna be no to not meet in 2 weeks, because here we are at this meeting. We had the accountability report, we had the fraternal order police report, we had the contract, we had the patrolmen's association contract, and we didn't even get to all the stuff that we just read for this meeting. So why would we keep assigning new things for us to read when we didn't even discuss all of the stuff that we
the
were?
patrol.
But we didn't. So my suggestion would be, and I would make this work for my schedule, would be to see if we can get this labor person in, and depending on their schedule, if they're available, then we should make it work for their schedule rather than superimpose a date before we even speak to them. So my suggestion would be to see if there's availability for that person, and then try to structure the next meeting around if they're available or not. And that's something that I can agree to.
The union contracts are not the only thing we're going to look at. We have the discipline matrix. We have a lot of things to look at. I'm going to schedule in 2 weeks because I think we need to keep on schedule. And if
So it doesn't.
no,
So, okay,
no, it's not. It's not
I do
about
want to say that
I'm not done speaking. Please let me explain. Last meeting, you had wanted to go into a deep dive, which I thought we were not ready for, of one case. I hope that we are going to get to that point. But all the things I'm assigning is to get us to that point. So the longer we wait, we're not going to get to that case. So, you know, I think that twice a monthly meetings would be okay.
I mean, the outreach committee starts soon, so can we just hold this?
We have 5 minutes until another committee
Okay.
comes, so.
You're suggesting we wait until this labor attorney that we don't even know who it is? for us to meet.
I will get it done.
Thank you.
I guess what I'm saying is the same way that I was willing to make the adjustment to attend this meeting so that we could all be present. I would like that same courtesy extended to me.
So why does that mean you're not available at all for next month?
I didn't say that, Teri. What
So when
I'm
are you
saying
available?
is that I personally think that we need to have some structure in place. I feel like I don't know what we accomplished today. I'm not sure what I don't know why I did those additional readings for today.
So you don't think that the
what I will take away
accountability-
from
All right,
this meeting
okay,
will
let's
be
give 5 minutes.
implicit bias and bias-free policing and nothing about accountability.
If it's,
That's what I'm taking away from
that's
This
unfortunate
falls under the training
because
committee.
it's because you started reading this material yesterday. So I'm sorry, it would be much more productive if we can. So yeah, I'm gonna assign the discipline matrix there. And I'm gonna assign the last monitor's report. How long would it take us to read those? And actually Marcus has already just texted me from OPS and he's given us the files. So we have files, but I don't wanna jump into that when we don't know the discipline matrix. So do we want to do the discipline matrix and one brief? And how long would that take?
That sounds good, the discipline matrix and one beside, are you,
One case each?
sure. That sounds good.
So how long? I'm gonna guess they're about like 20 pages, these investigations, and then we have some letters that are about 5 pages long, so about 30 pages of reading for the case. You'll write maybe 4 short paragraphs, like 1 page for the brief, and we'll present it. So,
I'm flexible. I'll defer to what the rest of the group thinks.
No.
all right, so I don't think we need to wait another month,
John,
so.
what are you?
Clearly, it does not matter what I think.
But I think, don't you
it
think a
doesn't
month
matter.
is too
It
much?
doesn't matter what.
What's the day? Pick a day.
I don't know.
in
At
September.
this point, we're at the end of the meeting. I think we're just rushing and plowing through. We clearly need to have another conversation, but we're gonna rush and plow through,
Would
even
the
though
last week of the
another
month be
committee
okay?
has to meet in 2 minutes.
Well, like the 28th be okay?
I would need to look at my calendar.
Okay, so.
Okay, let's just like do a doodle or something.
Okay, 29th and the 30th. I mean, that's 3 weeks away. Normally, we would have
We have a rules committee meeting on the 28th.
the 28th. But that's not even on this for some reason.
I mean, I see the rules, but like, could we have it
Let's not have it earlier. I think that's too much. Like, it's
I mean,
4
I'm
hours of
doing it.
meetings.
I'm
I
doing
know,
it today
I know, but we don't wanna.
because I had to make an
pattern.
accommodation for people.
All right, so we
Tuesday?
have Tuesday, the 29th is open.
One thing I'll say is the 4 o'clock was difficult for me
Yeah.
with work, so I would prefer not to do that if possible. I mean, I can make it work.
Tuesday at 6, John, the Tuesday at 6, is that okay?
Which
Or will school be there?
I need to look at my calendar. I feel like
Okay, yeah, let's send out some.
All right.
Teri, can you
Okay,
send
so I apologize. We will let everybody know when our next meeting is. Thank you for joining us.